Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on supporting emerging readers in the science classroom. And thank you also for introducing yourself. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves so you know who's on the other side of the camera, so you get to know who we are. So hey everyone, if we have not met before, my name is Erin Cook. You can tweet with me, at me, to me. I'm not sure of those to use, at Erin K. Cook. My background is in upper elementary education, coaching, and special ed. That was my passion for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. And now I really enjoy getting to support educators all across the country in their science journeys, their literacy journeys, supporting folks during this really crazy time with our websites, RocketLit and InOrbit. We'll talk more about what RocketLit here is in just a moment as well. But I know you were interested in what my favorite book, podcast, or YouTube channel has been recently. So mine is I'm Cheating. It's a book and it's a duology. So it's kind of two. It's by Leigh Bardugo, Six of Crowns and Crooked Kingdom. They're actually a duology based on a trilogy of like the same kingdom, but it's definitely like young adult fiction and like fantasy and adventure. And it's just really, really lovely. So that got me through last summer, the summer of 2020. So those books will always hold a special place in my heart. And this is my colleague, Brendan.
Hello, everyone. My name's Brendan Finch. You can tweet at me at BirdBrainFinch if you're into that. And I was a middle and high school science teacher for 7 years. A lot of the things that we're talking about today come from both my experience as an upper and secondary teacher and Erin's experience as an elementary teacher. So we're really, really excited to share with you our thoughts and all this. I've written hundreds of the articles on RocketLit and our assessments on InOrbit. So I'm really excited to show you around those things right now. InOrbit is not what we're going to talk about today. That's our NGSS assessment kind of sister site. But there's lots of cool stuff there if you're an NGSS district or you support teachers in NGSS. My favorite recent podcast is Ologies, where they interview scientists in these really, really, really niche areas. The one I'm listening to right now is on nephrology. We're really excited to chat with you today. We are going to talk about reading strategies, and all of this comes from and is embedded within RocketLit. So what is RocketLit? It's an adaptive reading platform for science. So that means two things. One, all of our articles are written in 7 reading levels. The same content is covered at 7 different reading levels. In addition, a reading diagnostic that students go through in the beginning, and every article students receive is either moved up or down a reading level to make sure that we're connecting with students at the level that they need at that moment in time. That means that for some units, students may go up in reading level, and for some units where students lack background knowledge, they'll go down reading levels to make the text more accessible. We have all these really, really cool reports where students can self-monitor and track their progress, and teachers or district level admin can see, what reading levels and progress students are making within RocketLit. And I am going to drop a link to our calendar in the chat, because if you would like, we are offering free pilots, and we're happy to set y'all up with an opportunity. Oh, Erin did it already. Thanks, Erin. With an opportunity to try it out. So a group of teachers from your school or district can hop in, use the site for a couple months towards the end of the school year, and hopefully gather some data and give students some access to reading and learning in science, because those two things are awesome and go hand in hand. And we're really excited you're here. And so the question is, what is your biggest barrier in supporting literacy through your science curriculum? We want to know what y'all are struggling with when it comes to building literacy and supporting that in your science curriculum. So it looks like it's a pretty even split between both time and literacy expertise, which makes sense because we're talking about science here. And for some reason, science sits aside from literacy in many of the conversations and training and PDs. We want to bring those things together. So we're really excited to talk to you about some of these strategies. The goal with today is that you can walk away from this and just immediately do these things in your classroom tomorrow. That's our goal. And I'm going to kick it back to Erin.
Let's talk about what we're going to be doing today in our really short webinar to answer our question, how can we support emerging readers in the science classroom? So our main objective is we're going to share, like Brendan said, really practical reading support strategies that won't add much time to what you're already doing, which is like the best thing, right? For you guys, for science educators, to kick off our monthly RocketLit webinar series. So you actually caught us on our first webinar for RocketLit, which is really exciting. We have other webinars for In Orbit if you've participated in those, but we're going to be doing these every month. And we're really hoping that what we talk about today really lays the foundation of how do you support readers in science, because that's really what we do at RocketLit, and we're so proud of it. So we have already done our introduction, so we can check that off the agenda. The next thing we're going to do very quickly is talk about how reading and science go together, because we've, for some reason, as a school or education system, have pulled them apart. So we're going to talk about how they interplay and are so intertwined. And then we're going to talk about those 3 practical reading support strategies that you can use with RocketLit, without RocketLit, in any classroom to use right away. And then we'll wrap up our time and have an exit survey for you as well. And we are recording our session today because we know folks are super busy, you might have missed the session. So we'll be recording it and sending it out for folks to watch later. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move into our part 2 of our webinar today, which is where we're going to talk about reading and science and how those two really come together. So as I just said, we've kind of separated these 2 subjects apart. So we're going to talk about how do reading and science go together, and then we're going to lay some foundational understandings of reading support that we're going to build on later in our strategies.
So I'm not sure why, but for some reason, science and literacy usually sit at separate tables when it comes to PD and all of this. But we want to change this. And the reality is that scientists spend more than half of their time reading and writing. And our good friend here, NGDT, is asking for an amen. And that's exactly right. So what we want to talk about today is building, if we're building students to be scientists, what a scientist does is research and communicate. They are reading and presenting information. They are synthesizing from multiple sources, and a lot of, if not almost all that they do is related to reading and writing. So we want to prepare students to make sure that if students are emerging readers at this point, that they are able to very quickly be able to access the same opportunities that students who are advanced or on grade level readers can have in science. And a big part of that is supporting reading and writing. So today we're talking mostly about reading, and we're really, really excited to give you some scaffolds where y'all can, support these future scientists with their reading, make them more confident, give them better access to that, and, be more successful as teachers as well.
So now that we know just how valuable reading and science are to each other, let's discuss why students might struggle with reading in the first place. So the key to growing as a reader is something called metacognition. And metacognition is a really fancy term that means thinking about your thinking, just like our friend Ray here, just being one of the 4. So really thinking about your thinking. And it's something we all do naturally, actually throughout our day, but it's something that really happens during reading as well. And it's something that good readers do, of being aware of what they're thinking while they're reading. So metacognition can look like many different things while you're specifically reading. It can look like summarizing as you go. So maybe after each paragraph, after each page, kind of checking in with yourself of like, well, what was that page about? Or even summarizing to make sure you aren't zoning out or haven't, not thinking deeply about the text. Metacognition can also look like wondering. So thinking of something related that maybe you're going to Google later, and your brain's kind of like making connections, or maybe even having questions. So like finding a moment in the text when you're like, that doesn't make sense. Like I have a question about that. All of those are just examples of metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking while you are reading. So for students, a big part of metacognition and why they might struggle is they might not be doing those strategies I just mentioned, and they might not realize when they don't understand what they're reading. So if they're not thinking about their thinking, they're kind of just like tap dancing over the text and not necessarily doing anything about when they don't understand, like my friend Brittany here. So if you're reading and not realizing when you don't understand what you're reading, and then if you're not sure what to do about it, that's when you might not have the tools to fix up your reading or your understanding. So some things that students can do, and we're going to talk about this in just a moment, but just to lay the foundation. If they don't understand, they can reread what they just read. They can read ahead. They can define specific vocabulary that feels confusing. They can chunk the text into smaller pieces. Like we're going to talk all about this. But the strategies that students want to realize when they don't understand and then what to do about it are like the big pieces to increasing metacognition so readers don't struggle and they continue to grow. So kind of like bottom line to all of this is that emerging readers may not be engaging in metacognition while they read. So as their teacher, our goal is to move them from passive reading when they don't know to being active while they read. So why do I have a cat in a scuba diving outfit on my slide? It's because I like to use the metaphor around snorkeling and scuba diving with students and trying to get them from being at the top of the water and just kind of watching the world go by to really scuba diving and deeply diving into the text through more active reading strategies. So that looks like making these invisible practices of summarizing or rereading or doing these things that kind of just might happen more naturally, making them explicit for students who might not do them on their own. It also looks like removing barriers that might prevent students from being active readers, like not interesting text. Like, heck, I can't even read things that aren't interesting very well. Or stamina, if they have a really hard time just even focusing or paying attention to text. Background knowledge, vocabulary, all of those things can be really big barriers for students while they read and it might be prohibiting them from being active. So these are what we're going to talk about today, these strategies of how can we remove these barriers and how can we increase students' activity while they're reading to really, again, scuba dive down into the text to make sense of the science content you're trying to have them understand and learn. So with that foundation, let's move into the meat of our webinar, which is talking about what are the practical strategies we can do to do those things to support emerging readers in our science classroom. So we're first I'll introduce the strategy and kind of give the background, and then Brendan's going to talk about what that looks like in practice, and we're going to use a lot of examples from our site RocketLit because this is what we do, and this is what our site does for educators too. So without further ado, the first strategy to support your emerging reader in your science classroom is by increasing the access to the text. This is a pre-reading strategy, something that you would do before, that you would plan for as an educator before students read. And then you're kind of a sneak peek here to our other two strategies that we're going to talk about later. But let's talk about increasing access. So you can increase access in three ways. So the first is by considering your word choice and your vocabulary in the actual text. So a struggle for emerging readers is they need to learn the science content that's in this text, but they struggle to do so because the text is inaccessible. The word complexity is just too challenging for them to understand what the concepts, are trying to convey. So to increase the text accessibility, consider the text word choice and the vocabulary, thinking of which terms are crucial to the science content and which words can be simplified just to help increase understanding. So you might be familiar or not with thinking about word complexity in this kind of three-tier structure. So tier 1 words are really everyday words, familiar to most folks through conversation, how you kind of pick up these words as you go. Tier 2 words are really high academic vocabulary words. They're still cross-curricular, but they might be jargon that we might not use in everyday life. Jargon actually might be a good example of a tier 2 vocabulary word. But then tier 3 vocabulary is domain specific vocabulary. And this is usually what you want students to pick up from in text, like photosynthesis or chloroplast, like specific words that you want students to be able to understand to increase their vocabulary and expression in science. So what we do at InOrbit for lower reading levels, we try to remove as much tier 2 vocabulary as possible, identify which tier 3 vocabulary words we want students to learn and focus on, and increase that tier 1 language. So making it very simple and understandable, decreasing the complexity so students understand those tier 3 words. But then over time, as students increase in their reading levels, we slowly add back in more tier 2 vocabulary. So students, increase their vocabulary, build their stamina, all of that good stuff. But really, we looked for, when we're supporting emerging readers, removing those crazy tier 2 language from the text as much as possible so students understand what they're reading. A second way to increase access is to think about the length and the chunking of your text. So think about the cognitive load, so not the physical load like my friend Bill here, but the cognitive load that students shoulder when they're reading, and to decrease it as much as possible so they find success. If it's not possible to shorten the text, you can chunk the text into manageable sections over time so students can refresh their stamina and not be overwhelmed. And then the third way you can increase access in this strategy is to use text-to-speech tools like my friend Ron Swanson here to help remove barriers like decoding issues. So if they're not able to understand or read the words on the page, and even focus is a really good way for text-to-speech tools to help as well. So increasing students' access to science content while still being immersive in language and vocabulary that text-to-speech tools provide is a great way to reduce those barriers as well. So let's see how we can actually do that with RocketLit.
All right, so the first article we're going to look at, and this is one of our articles from our light unit, is on Ride the Light Wave. And we've got this really awesome art. If you've been on RocketLit, we have amazing artwork for all of the articles. And in this particular article, one of the ways that we use these strategies is we focus on 4 very specific words. And these are the only 4 words that are defined explicitly and used because they are pivotal in the understanding that we're looking for students to gain from this article. So those are visible, properties, invisible, and matter. And as we're looking at how light interacts with objects and, what students can already understand and what we want students to understand, these are the 4 words that are defined. And in all of the articles on RocketLit, there is between 3 or 5, or there are between 3 or 5 words that are defined. Usually it's 4 because we want to make it a simple and small number. But these are the words that as students leave the article, they should understand very well. And the rest of the article is all built around defining and building analogies to help students understand these words. So let's dive into the article and look at how some of this is also used in the rest of the text, aside from that definition. So the vocab word here in all of this, in all of these options we're looking at, is visible. So everything here at the 3rd, 4th grade level, at the 7th grade level, and at the 11th, 12th grade level, all looks to define the word visible. And all the text around it is what we're recommending that you adapt to make sure students have access. So the first thing at the 3rd, 4th level in our little yellow box right here, we talk about a flashlight in the night as one of the examples. And in the 7th grade level, to increase the complexity of that text, we say a flashlight beaming through the night. And then at the 11th, 12th grade level, we can say the sun beaming through the atmosphere, a flashlight panning through the jungle at night. We add in additional colorful language vocabulary to allow those upper level readers to really sink their teeth into words that they understand and are familiar with. Where at the lower reading levels, we want to make sure those students are not distracted. Their affective filter doesn't come up and they aren't, unable to access the rest of the text because they're intimidated by all this language. At the 3rd, 4th level, we also use the word part to describe a small piece of something. At the 7th grade level, we use the word section. At the 11th, 12th grade level, we'll use the word fraction. And again, all we're looking to do is communicate the meaning of the word visible and make sure that students walk away from reading this article or this paragraph understanding the word visible and not distract them. But when they're ready for it, give them that additional vocabulary, those additional adjectives, that colorful language that allow them to sink their teeth into and grow as readers. And then we adapt the reading level that they receive as they improve on RocketLit. So they may start at a 3rd grade level, and if they're doing well, they'll move up to a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then hopefully up to a high school levels. Another way that we actually adapt what's going on in RocketLit is we change the word count in the article. So at the 5th grade level, this very article has 474 words. At the 6th grade, it's 614. When we get up to the 8th grade, it's 1,036. And at the 11th, 12th grade levels, it's 1,621. So very deliberately and markedly, every single time students are reading this article at a different reading level, they are reading a significant amount of text. The goal here is that at that 5th grade level, so at the lower levels, we just want to communicate what the vocab words mean, give students some analogies to think about, to help conceptualize and make this more concrete. At the upper grade levels, we can start to really mix it up and give students more opportunities to read, maybe some additional information, some peripheral topics where advanced readers are hungry for more and can sink their teeth into. But the idea here is that at the lower levels, we just want to keep it essential and focused. What do we want students to walk away from this text with? And how can we describe that in the most plain and clear language possible?
And then our third way to increase access with text-to-speech, like we talked about before, is we do have an embedded text-to-speech tool on our site, which is pretty simple. Press play and you get to hear the article read to you, which is amazing. But I wanted to just kind of point on this part for a moment, thinking about when we're thinking of emerging readers using these strategies and using text-to-speech tools for those students, which is great. But I also want you to think about using this text-to-speech tool and how it'd be good for all of your learners. So if you're familiar with the ideas behind Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, that tools can actually be used universally for many, many different reasons to probably actually solve or help students in ways that you wouldn't even imagine. And kind of a nice metaphor is this random picture of this building here that I have on my slide, but how maybe ramps outside of public buildings and spaces where for folks maybe using wheelchairs to access the building, but have actually been used in many, many ways. So for folks who have crutches, or if you're pushing a stroller, or if you have like a lot of stuff in your arms, you can't see the steps, right? There's many different ways that you can use this tool, maybe other than just the initial use or the initial design of it. So I would encourage you to consider using text-to-speech tools kind of in a similar way with all of your students. It might help with a lot of other things besides maybe students who just struggle to decode. So that's kind of my little, soapbox about that. So let's move into our second strategy, which is activating schema. And schema is just a fancy word for background knowledge. So engaging students' schema or their background knowledge helps them make connections to their prior experiences and understandings, and also helps prevent some of those like crazy misconceptions that kids can kind of pick up as they go along. To activate schema, there's lots of different strategies that you can do that. A really, really quick one is a text walk. So you're literally not walking on the text, but what you are doing is you're previewing the text for students before they read it to kind of give them signposts of what they should be looking for or thinking about as they read. So pointing out the title or the captions or the graphs or any like text features like that will help students kind of get in their mind like what connections should I be making and what path should I be going down, instead of maybe if you hadn't previewed the text, they might be going down a whole separate path and making their own connections, or might even not be, since it's unfamiliar territory, might not even want to engage with the text. There's a lot of different ways and formats you can do a text walk. You can keep it really simple and just have a teacher modeled one for like 30, 45 seconds of just pointing out things on the article, which Brendan's actually going to do for us here in just a moment. You can make it a little bit more complex by having a whole group teacher facilitated discussion, asking questions, what do you notice? What do you think the text is going to be about? Like, why is there a picture of so-and-so on here? Getting students thinking. And then you can even maybe do it as a small group as well. So having small groups of kids doing a text walk together with some specific guiding questions, and then coming back as a whole group for them to share what they noticed or what they infer the article is going to be about. So there's many different ways to do a text walk, but again, the whole reason is to activate their schema, their background knowledge. So as they're reading, they can be more metacognitive of like, this is the path I'm going down, and help them make connections too. Let's hear Brendan do that sample text walk.
We want to model these things for y'all, because if you haven't done these before, they're pretty simple. So I'm going to pretend that I'm a teacher, y'all are my students, and we're going to go through this. So this article I see in front of me, the first thing I notice is an image. So at the very, very top, there's an image of, it looks like maybe the sun, or I don't know, a meteor or something like that. And then there's a tree, and the tree is eating a part of, I don't know, like the fire or something like that coming out of it. That's what? Okay, that's crazy. I'm glad that trees don't have mouths. So using the sun's energy is the title of the article that's right below the image right there. Oh, so connecting back up to the image, I see that that's probably the sun, and that's probably a plant that we're talking about here. It makes a little bit more sense. And right below that, there are 4 different purple phrases or words. So chemical energy, sunlight energy, photosynthesis, chloroplasts. Those are probably words that are going to be defined later. I'm not familiar with a few of those. And then right below that, it says cells unit. So I know that cells are tiny, tiny parts of living things. So maybe this is talking about tiny parts of living things like plants and how they use the sun's energy. I'm not going to read the text for you all right now. We're just doing a quick little walkthrough, but I do see an image of a yummy little Sammy that's hanging out down there. It looks like some deli meat or something inside of that. Yum. And then below that, at the very, very bottom of this screenshot, I see the word photosynthesis, and it looks like it's bolded, which is also one of the words that's at the very top up there. So it looks like those words right below the title are probably defined later on in the text. All right. And teacher modeling. The whole goal here is that your students and you all as active readers do this on your own. But before you even engage in anything that involves reading and looking at any of the words in the text, you can learn an enormous amount from just the image. And we work very, very hard to find interesting and also descriptive images that we've created for each of these articles. So the idea is that before students even get into reading the text and grappling with the words on the page, they're able to get something out of that. So modeling this process for students allows you to frame their reading and allows you to frame what they're doing. It's pretty simple. So if y'all are using the NGSS and you're talking about phenomena, this is a big thing. Like, what do you notice here? We just give students an image or a GIF or a video, and we say, what do you see in this? And these text walks are exactly the same thing. What observations can you make superficially in this? And what connections can you make to other things that you've seen before or that you know prior before you dive into this?
Now let's dive into our third and last reading support strategy that you can use with emerging readers, but really, as we kind of talked about, with all of your readers as well, which is active reading. We've talked about active reading a little bit at the beginning, so we're going to really unpack it here. But the two strategies we just discussed, increasing access and activating schema, those are pre-reading strategies. So things to consider before reading or things that you're walking students through. Active reading will be during reading. So the text is in front of the kiddo and they are doing something with it. And again, the goal of active reading is to support metacognition. The students are moving away from being just passive readers to being more active understanders. Again, many different ways to increase students' activity while they're reading. The one we're going to talk about today is annotation. So annotation means literally just doing something physically or electronically to the text with purpose. There might be some reasons you want students to annotate, like to find the main idea, or to record when they do a fix-up strategy like rereading, or to write down a question that they had, maybe even a specific content question, so you as like the science educator can follow up on that. Making sure that when you're asking students to annotate the text, there's a purpose to it. And then choosing the tool, again, many different tools out there for kiddos to annotate, either like hard copy or online, highlighting, underlining, circling notes, right? So many different commenting, like all these different ways. So when you're using the strategy of annotation, my advice to you is to be purposeful and minimal, because we don't want to add more barriers for students, like getting really excited about this annotation strategy and we give them all these things to annotate might actually create more barriers. So being really specific and saying, I want you to highlight the main idea. And we're going to practice that for just a couple months. And then for you as an educator to look at the highlights really quickly and see, okay, they got it. Or if you're just focusing on a certain set of students, okay, they got it. And then a couple months later adding, okay, now I want you to leave a sticky note when you have a question. And I want you to have just one question for each, text that you read, and being able to follow up on that. So again, not just throwing a whole bunch at them that's actually going to create more stumbling blocks what they read, but just adding something small to make them more active while they're reading, that they need to do something to the text while they go. And this is something too that you can model as a teacher too, just so they understand what that looks like. But let's see about how we can do that on RocketLit.
And we're going to do that with bouncing light off the moon. This is one of our articles on how the moon is illuminated at different times or is not, depending on the phase that we're looking at, or if it's an eclipse or other things. So again, this article is written at 7 reading levels on RocketLit. This is what we do, is provide that differentiated text. And in this article, there are just 4 terms or phrases that are defined, and that's reflect, phase of the moon, solar eclipse, and generate. And then I'm going to model for you, how we can annotate. And again, just to underscore what Erin said, please don't have your students do all of these things at once. Pick one thing, have them be good at that one thing, and then we'll move on to a second one. So the first thing right here that we're going to look at is this circle. And so we circled the word them as an initial sort of strategy. And I made a note over here that I reread this. So I read that paragraph about generate and I was a little lost. So I'm just making a note to myself and also to my teacher that I had to reread this paragraph in order to kind of understand what was going on there. And the second thing is highlighted in green down here. And that is, I highlighted the moon is big and white and reflects the sun's light down to earth. And I wrote in the annotation, main idea. And this article is about bouncing light off the moon. And that's what it's about, y'all. The moon is big, it reflects the sun's light. We can see it, we're on Earth. The last thing is we underlined, but we can't always see the part that's lit. So I wrote a question in my annotation. I said, why can't we see all of the moon? And this is a question that either myself as a reader can go back through and answer, or just think about the fact that I don't understand, or a teacher can read later on, and on RocketLit, teachers can see the annotations that students made, and then you could, talk about it in class, because maybe that's a misunderstanding or an important concept that you want to make sure that students, have a firm grasp on. So again, all of these are a few options. There are a lot of different things you can have students do, like summarize or write vocab words in their own, in their own sentences or whatever it is. But the idea here is that you have students actively engaging with the text, and then they're writing down what they were thinking or what they were doing as they're going through it, so that they're not just, the text isn't just happening to them, that they are engaging with and grappling with the text the whole time.
These are the 3 strategies we have talked about today: increasing access, activating schema, and promoting active reading. And they all go well together, like a delicious s'mores maybe, but you also don't have to have all together. Like graham crackers are really great just on their own too. So when you're thinking about what next steps to take, feel free just to choose which strategy might be the most natural in your context, kind of the easiest next shift, and then slowly start building over time. But all together, incorporating pre-reading strategies, during reading strategies, and there's even after reading strategies, which we haven't even touched on today, but incorporating all those strategies really just kind of creates this nice cocoon supporting your emerging readers as they're engaging with the text. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. We're going to summarize very quickly everything we've talked about today, and then talk about what maybe is next and you guys can look forward to. The things we've talked about today is metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking. And that's really the goal of supporting emerging readers, is for them to be aware of that internal dialogue of what's happening while they're reading. So then they can fix when they don't understand, and then they can engage deeply and be active in the text too, which again is the difference between passive reading and active reading. So we talked about these 3 strategies. So increasing students' access to the text ahead of time with teacher decisions that you make by focusing on word choice, length, and text-to-speech tools. Second strategy is activating schema. So increasing that, background knowledge and experiences, so students are on the right path. They know the signpost of what they should be looking for as they read, which helps them be metacognitive through doing a text walk. And then lastly, that third strategy is promoting active reading while students are engaging with the text by being purposeful and minimal with annotation strategies and tools as well. So many other strategies out there too. So we'd actually like to take a moment to hear from you guys as well, because we have a lot of educators with us here today that have many different experiences and probably have a lot more to add to what we just mentioned here. On the Zoom chat, we would love for you to share what are some other of your favorite strategies to support emerging readers. We'd love to hear that as well. And then, educators are the best thieves, so that folks can steal ideas and maybe apply in their classroom as well. So I'll give you guys a couple moments to share that in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you guys so much for sharing.
And if you are looking for help with this, we do this, and we do pretty well, frankly. And I dropped a link to our calendar in the chat. So if you do want to meet up with us, we are offering pilots of RocketLit for free. You can just try the site out for a couple months towards the end of the school year. Give your students some adaptive and differentiated science text. So again, we have a reading diagnostic that students go through in the beginning. And as they click through and read articles and answer quiz questions or assessment items, they move up and down reading levels throughout. And every article is written at 7 different reading levels, and there are hundreds of articles supporting mostly topics from 5th through 8th grade. But if you're a high school science teacher, there's a lot of content in there that will provide foundational knowledge. And if you're an elementary science teacher, there's plenty of content as well that will cover the I guess probably grades like 3 and 4 as well. But primarily this is for middle school, which I see as kind of the chasm in between elementary school, and we are going to support you a lot with reading, and high school where you're kind of on your own, kid. Like, here's your bio textbook. So we focus on clear and helpful data. We want teachers to be able to track progress, vocab words, and also reading growth. And students can also track all of that stuff on their own. And we have free pilots that we offer for teams of teachers. So if you want to do this by yourself, or you have a bunch of friends and they're also teachers and y'all teach at the same school, which is the most beautiful thing, then we'd love to give you all an intentional pilot, and you can hop on and and try it out together. And we'll walk you through the site and then, let y'all loose and get started. I feel like this is the year where we need to make sure that students that don't usually have access to content have an increased opportunity for access, because we're not there to kind of look over the shoulder and be like, oh, actually it's blah, blah, blah. And you can't really kneel down to them quite as well and correct those misunderstandings. So RocketLit is just aiming to automate that for you as a teacher and make your life easier where you don't have to differentiate. And then the articles are written in a really kid-friendly language so that they have access to that content without you having to explain it again in your teacher voice with, like, what does illuminate mean, or what does reflect mean, or whatever it is.
Beautiful. And as I mentioned before, we're doing this every month for a couple months, which we're really excited about. So if you want to write some of these things down, our next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, April 13th. We'll have more information in our follow-up email to this event. But we're going to be talking about, when does literacy pack a punch in a science unit? So maybe now you feel equipped of how you can support all of your readers, and then even emerging readers as well. But when do you introduce literacy in a science unit? For what purposes? So we're going to really unpack that in April. And then in May, we're going to really deeply dive into the three-dimensional standards of the NGSS. And we're going to talk about how they were designed with literacy in mind, if not to drive literacy. As an elementary teacher, I'm always to say, like, science helps literacy and literacy helps science. So I feel like that's really important. And we're going to talk about why those two things are so connected in May. So thank you so much for being with us today. Your time is so valuable, and for you to spend time with us, we're just really honored.